Thank you for joining us, everyone, for another episode of Live by Heart
Today
with your hosts, Dawn Spiegelberg and Wendy R. Wolf.
Hello and welcome to the Live by Heart Today show number 14. This is a show designed to help you navigate change, uncertainty, and the new world we found ourselves in. We'll talk a little bit about science, a little bit about how our body works, a little bit about intuition, and we'll talk a lot about transformation. Our theme for today is weathering relationship, and I'm excited to share it with you. And with us for today's Heart to Heart is our co-host, Wendy R. Wolf, Transformation Facilitator. Thanks for joining us, Wendy.
Yay, thanks, Dawn. This is such a great topic for now. We were talking about this because I believe right now relationships are more important, getting more and more important as we're having more challenges with them right now socially. So I feel like this is just such an important topic.
It is important. And when I think back on my life, which is easy to do because there's a lot to look back on, I see that there are so many relationships that have changed. And, there are some relationships, they talk about family, right? You're stuck with family all the time. But the question is, when we change, I'm not a child anymore, right? And I'm not in my 20s. And then I got married and now I have my own children. So can our family transform with us? Can family accept us while we're changing and taking on different roles in our lives? And I think being in relationship through storms is so important because some people don't have family that they can rely on, right? Some people don't have friends that they could call in the middle of the night and say, hey, I'm just struggling right now. Can we talk for a minute? So yeah, weathering relationships I think it's a skill.
I do think it's a skill. And I don't think all relationships are made to last forever. At least in the same levels of commitment or whatever. But I really believe it is a skill to be able to, in ourselves and together with somebody, to be investing. And for me, one of the most important things, and something that is a strong value for Michael and I, which is I think why we work well, is freedom. Like just giving so much freedom for my friends and my family to be who they are is such a gift, and sometimes it's really challenging.
It is challenging. And when you say freedom, it reminds me of when my children were toddlers. Because when we have children, we presume that they're going to grow up and be adults, right? And it's kind of funny, those people who worry about their child being potty trained. Like, I've never seen a 10-year-old wearing diaper, a normal 10-year-old child wearing diapers. So
Right.
What really are they worried about? They're not seeing the whole picture. But the truth is, there are moments in time when a toddler begins to move away from the parent, right? They explore, and if you pay attention, you can see what level of exploration they're in, because they might be standing there and holding onto your knees, and then they might take 3 steps away and then turn around and come right back, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or they might be even willing to leave your side and go to the next room.
Yeah.
But the truth is, they're always coming back, right? The toddlers are leaving and they're always coming back. And I'll say this, as an adult child,
yes,
I talk about going home. Now, I have a home of my own, right? And I have a husband and my own children. But if I say, oh, I'm going home, everybody knows what that means. That means I'm going to my parents.
Yes. Yes. And you remind me of, I understand that there's also a stage in adolescence that's the same exact, that the teenagers are looking for more and more and more freedom and more space, but
Yes.
then need to be able to come back home and us be there. And how
Yes.
really important that is. And what you're just pointing to is we never get over that in some ways. In some way, it's a real blessing to be able to go home. I mean, it warms my heart to know that I can go to my mother's house and be accepted. And I'm 55. It's really nice.
Yes. And of course, you've weathered the relationship, right? I think of my relationship with my mother, and when I was a teenager, oh, it was so hard, right? And she would pick out like a shirt when we'd go shopping, and it was just so torturous for her, right? And then in my 20s, I left home, and that's not what you do when you're raised, strongly religious. You
Mm-hmm.
don't leave home, you stay home until you get married. Well, I didn't do that. So that was a strain on the relationship. And then I
Yeah.
got married to someone who wasn't a devout Christian, right? That was another strain. Like everything I've done in my life has strained the relationship with my mother.
Yeah.
And it's amazing because we still talk about it. So now our relationship is different.
Yeah.
And we've weathered a lot. And she was worried for me for years and years and years. And now I think it's my turn. I get to worry about her from a different
Mm-hmm.
perspective,
Right.
Mom, did you get up out of the chair today? Mom, did you drink enough water today? It's transformed and changing. So now
Mm-hmm.
I'm weathering a storm that she weathered when I was an infant,
Yeah.
It
And
all
she's still concerned for you too, I'm sure.
that is true. That is
Yeah,
true. But it all comes full circle.
it does. Yeah.
So I just like to mention something about weathering the storms of relationships, and I've found that all of the conversations we had about neutrality is one of the things that is key to maintaining relationship, because when you leave, right, and then you go back, or when you're in a relationship and then you have to step outside it for some reason, like, I don't know, you go off to college or you get a job in a different state, and then you're
Mm-hmm.
coming back to that relationship and trying to reestablish and renegotiate and decide what's significant about the relationship from this new point that I'm at, right? Because I'm a different person now. I've been in the world, I've seen the world. I remember seeing my mother as a different person after I gave birth, because I did it once and she did it 4 times. I saw my sister differently because she did it 7 times.
Oh my
So
goodness.
yeah. And for me to maintain neutrality was so vital, because we were able to then figure out how to reconnect,
Mm-hmm.
less strain.
Yes. Without all the judgment and the have tos and the shoulds, it takes a lot of the stress off the table if they don't have to think like me or act like me or talk like me or vote like me or
Oh God, I'm
whatever.
so glad you mentioned that, because when I'm in neutral, it's so easy. It's much easier. So easy for me to be in neutral now, because my mother still says things that used to drive me banana, right? Like, oh, don't worry about getting dressed. Just make sure your hair looks okay. Just fix your hair, right? Like it was always about my hair. And for me, anything to do with my hair is last on the list, right? I get dressed, I put on my lipstick, I find my eyeglasses, right? And my hair is last. Like I don't care that much about it. And it's easy to just, not do anything about it. But for her, that was primary. And when I think about it, oh, she grew up in the 50s.
Mm.
Right? Remember the bouffants and the thises and that's, like hair was a big deal in the 50s. Took me all this time to figure it out, right? That was her important thing. And boy, that just triggered me for years. I
Yeah.
wasn't neutral about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have gorgeous hair she has pictures, I bet, that your hair takes a little bit of care to look nice because it's got such body and
Hmm. Well, yeah, she says, "Oh, put it up. I like it when it's up. Put it up.
Yeah.
Just put it up." And that's a 50s thing, right? With all
Yeah.
those beehives and so it's interesting. Oh, so this is a great moment to mention. She has that belief system from when she was growing up. So she was born in 1940.
Yeah. Right.
So she was 10 in 1950, right? 15 in 1955. So these are impressionable years for her.
Mm-hmm.
And so those expectations that were placed on her from, high school and elementary school and growing up during those periods of time
Mm-hmm.
have created a value system for her that's completely different from mine, having grown up
Yeah.
decades later.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a great segue into what people talk about is probably what they value, right? Somewhere in the subjects, you could discern what's important to them and what they value.
Yeah.
So storming relationships, you can benefit from knowing what other people value and giving them the space and freedom to allow them to have that value and know that you don't have to value what they value.
Yeah. I have a wondering about this. Yes. I mean, people who are free and unbound about it are talking about what is valued. I do have pictures though that some folks are bounded about what they're allowed to talk about or what's appropriate in a certain relationship or situation.
Right.
So like that's where I get a little like about these pictures about like you're not allowed to talk about this with this person, like I don't pay attention a lot to that. So like when so I like find myself hitting walls about it, and I'm like, I don't know where the walls are or why they're there, and so sometimes people aren't saying what's most important to them is what I'm saying.
That's true.
They feel like
But if they're
allowed.
not saying it, then that's something to note, right?
It sure is. Like it tells me a lot. It's information. What they're talking about is information about what they can and can't talk about and what's important or valid. But I don't always understand it, honestly.
So tell me how you've weathered relationships, right? Like if people aren't talking about things and that's sort of confusing to you about trying to figure out what you can talk about and what you shouldn't talk about, and they don't want to talk about that. Like when I was growing up, my dad would not talk about like boyfriends or right,
Wow.
that he didn't want to know that his daughter was out dating. He just didn't want to know, and so I didn't talk about it.
Wow.
Right? I didn't want to put that in his face. I didn't want to say, well,
Yeah.
this is what I'm doing. I just let it be.
And that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it went fine. Like you just finally came home one day and said, I'm getting married, or like how did it work?
Well, you can imagine me moving to Seattle with someone was a difficult conversation. I think it wasn't a difficult conversation for me, but I think it was difficult for him to wrap his mind around it. But it had been a few years. So I had already moved out of the house, and my parents being fundamental and being highly, highly spiritual people, they had ideas, right? You don't leave home unless you leave home to get married. You don't leave home
Right.
unless unless you're going on a mission trip to Africa or something,
Right.
right? And even then, don't do it without your husband. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard. Like, so what happened, it sounds like, is that you guys had different pictures. This is a storm. You had different pictures about how you live your life and what your ethics are and what boundaries you live in. You had different pictures somehow than they did. You know how you got those different pictures?
Do I know how I got them?
Right. Like you got more freedom in how you believe you can live your life than they did.
That's true.
Did you have to fight for it in your own mind and heart? Like, how did that happen?
I don't know. I don't know that I had to fight for it. It just seemed to, I mean, it came naturally for me, but the fighting did come from my parents during that period of time when you're trying to leave home, but they want you to stay home. For some people that happens when they're 13, 14, 15, and 16, right? That happened for my husband when he was like 14, he was gone from home. But for me, it didn't happen until I was 22. And so for me to try to, like when I was 19, my mother didn't want me to go on a road trip with my cousin who was also 19 and drive to another state. She thought that was wrong and a mistake and don't do that. And I was like, what? I'm 19. I've been driving for 3 years, and I'm going
Right.
with someone. I'm not going with no one by myself, right? I'm
Right.
going with someone. So that was a struggle. So of course I knew what to expect when I was 22 and I wanted to say, I'm out of here. I'm moving in with friends, and that was just unheard of. So it was easy for me to do it. It was hard for them to watch me do it. It was hard for them to let go.
Yeah, it is hard. And now you're on the other side. You're looking at, your boys are going to be flying the coop before you know it. And
At some point, I still have years ahead of me. But I love this conversation because we spoke in a prior episode about the empty nest syndrome,
yes,
right? And I do not think I am going to have that. Of course, I'll miss having my children home,
yes,
but I won't experience it in the same way that my mother experienced it when my older sister first left
yeah,
because I'm full.
yes,
It's because I'm not a mother whose only relationships are horizontal. It's
yes,
because I fill myself with love and validation, and I create for myself my own safety, right?
mm-hmm.
From a vertical relationship, from
Yes,
a spiritual fullness.
mm-hmm.
And so I know that I'm always connected to my children, whether I live in the same house as they do or not.
Yes,
So I guess that's another way of weathering relationships because I always feel connected, and perhaps I got some of that perspective from my father because I always felt connected to my father. I didn't have to call him every day, and especially at the end, it was hard. I was at his deathbed, and I could see my family struggling with it.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, that was hard, but for the most part, it wasn't that difficult for me. My relationship with my father was so deep and so strong that just being there, I didn't have to speak with him. I held his hand,
mm-hmm.
but I saw the difficulty of other family members really struggling with it. And of course, my mother, because my mother left home when she was 18 and married my father, right? So
Yeah,
she'd never been alone before,
it's so hard.
right?
Yeah,
So
that's one of the
weathering
parts.
relationships.
It's one of the parts that make it really hard when you go from your parents' house to your spouse's house. That, like, once that person leaves somehow,
Yes, yes.
then there's a whole lot of learning to do that you could have done when you were young.
It's true. And everyone has their own path. So I
Yeah,
honor her and her
sure,
path.
sure. But
Yeah,
there's good parts about doing it differently. So
that's true. With
awesome.
that, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk a little more about doing things differently in weathering relationships.
Thanks again to our sponsors for making this show possible.
Welcome back to the Live by Heart Today show. We are talking about weathering relationships and how we all have different expectations and different ways of being connected to each other.
Yes. And you were saying that it has helped you to allow the vertical relationships, to allow yourself to be filled with, you said, love, validation, safety. You said it like this.
I did. Yeah, the
And
emphasizing vertical.
yes. And I would add like certainty in our soul, sovereignty in our soul, these kinds of things. And what I wanted to bring up here is that I feel like those kinds of things to be filled up with are so helpful, because then we are it, we're comfortable, we're confident, we're sure, we're full. And then we can go into the world like that without
Mm.
wondering or needing so much. But also what I want to bring out here is that when I really am love, when I really am certainty, whatever it is, I allow you to have it.
Ah,
And I feel like that is so important to weathering the storms in relationships, because I can honor that you have love, that you are love, or that you are certain in your soul about what's real for you. And it can be different than me. And I could just let that be so.
I have to jump in here because what you're talking about is a phenomenon, and I want to mention it in the body. Okay. You said when you're full of love, you allow me to love too. And we can use certainty, right? We can use any word in there. When you uh, are responsible, right, and have your own authority, then
Yes.
you allow other people, right, to also be responsible and have their own authority. And
Yes.
you're giving permission to yourself to be who you are and giving permission to other people to be who they are. And I want to mention what you're describing is the responsibility of certain cells in our brain. They're called mirror neurons. What does that mean? It means you are being an example of how it's possible to be, how
Yeah.
it's possible to live. And when I see you being in love, being in certainty, being compassionate, then that gives me the image that I can also be that way too. And this plays beautifully after the prior show that we did called Be the Change. Because when we are it, we are showing the world what is possible so that they can choose that possibility too. How do we know this is true? Nobody thought it was humanly possible for a man or woman to run a 4-minute mile.
Yeah.
And then a man ran a 4-minute mile, and then everybody was doing it. What is that? That's a mirror neurons, right? That's saying, oh, he did it, and now I can do it too.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Yeah.
beautiful example.
It's a great example. And I feel like, from my perspective, there's the physical part of it, and there's the seeing it and in the physical world. And then I feel like there's a part of our souls that overcomes limits, and we show each other what's possible, like a monkey see, monkey do, in ways that aren't measurable by science. That's just my belief.
Well, yeah, our soul has mirror neurons too.
Like that.
Right.
Like that.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of this, what I'm digging here, there's all that, and then there's something more. There's the, let me see if I can say it like this. When I have soul certainty, when I am sure of my internal experience, when I'm sure that, like right now, the leaves that I look at are green, then I can completely support your certainty. Like it's a freedom or a gift to be like, I have it, and therefore I'm all for you having it. And so it's great for our kids, it's great for our friends. Like and if you're like, well, Wendy, that for whatever the lighting or whatever, those leaves look a little bluish to me. It's like, great, I don't care. They're green to me. That's all that matters.
Mm.
And what happens if we're not certain is that, like, I have to dominate you with my opinion. That tells me somebody's trying to dominate with their opinion. That tells me that they're not so sure about their opinion, because what do they care
Ooh,
what I
that's brilliant. I call that fanaticism, right? Right. It's not enough that they believe it, but they're forcing me to believe it too.
Yeah. And that's one of the issues that make it hard to be in relationship when there's storms or when there's difference of opinions or when there's, and what I'm saying is though, that it's not always how it looks. Like if I am living in freedom, then I allow you freedom. My freedom doesn't keep you from freedom. My certainty doesn't keep you from certainty. It actually, like you said with the mirror neurons, it helps you with your freedom and your certainty, and you're living in the energy of truth.
Right.
It
It shows
helps
me what's
you.
possible.
It shows, and so that these things, allowing heaven and earth and our friends to help support these things. If I'm really in love, if I'm in the filled up with love, there's nothing I want more than to see you filled up with love. You don't have to have my love. You don't have to, like, I give you all kinds of freedom.
You're talking about resonance, right? So my violin, and I pluck the A string, and the violin across the room that hasn't been touched, the A string begins to vibrate. That's resonance. So you being in love resonates with the part of me that can be in love. And it actually calls love out of me. It actually begins the vibration of love within me. And that's beautiful. And that's how me being the change makes a difference in the world, because
Absolutely.
me living in love and certainty and compassion and kindness begins to resonate, no matter how weak it may be in another person, no matter how distant that experience was, right? Because love isn't a present day phenomenon for a lot of people, and certainty isn't a present moment experience. So
Mm-hmm.
your certainty is sending the resonance of certainty into the world, giving freedom for others to also resonate certainty. I love it.
Yeah, that the resonance is foundational to the work that I do. Um, and I just want to disambiguate it. Like there's the resonance, there's the matching, there's the mirroring, and then there's the the there's the freedom that if I am certain, then I allow you certainty. That's like, as a honestly, as a teacher of these things, that's how I know somebody's really got it.
Mm.
Are they allowing their peers to have certainty too? Are they allowing to say, looks blue, looks green, all good, next? Or are they like, no, you have to see it's green?
Ah. So,
Right?
that seems to me like then they're not certain. Isn't that what you said?
Exactly. That's what I'm
Right?
saying.
Then they're not really certain.
Then they're not certain. Wait, that's how we know.
Uh,
And with sovereignty or what would you, authority, if somebody really has authority, it's yes, it's showing how it's done, and everybody rises to that, but it's also permission. It's also invitation. Like it's also like, I have authority to go left. I'm going right. Great. Like that's, everybody has their own authority. But if it's like,
mm.
I'm going left, no, you're bad. Just, then we know. And it's just so important distinction to realize in our relationships, because a lot of us are schooled in control and schooled in like wanting people to do it like we do it. There's some temptation about that. And so it's just really helpful to have this distinction.
You're absolutely right. We're schooled in control, and a part of that, and the word conformity comes to mind, but a
Yeah.
part of that has to do with the subconscious mind's need to stay safe. And when you're in a community, right, people maintain safety by creating this, homogenous
Yes.
way of being. And you're
Yes.
talking about something different than that. You're
Yes,
talking
I am.
about autonomy,
Yes.
maintaining a community while also allowing for individuality.
Yes. And I feel like that is foundational to being able to live together in times of change and to allow storms to come and go and everybody to have different opinions and still love each other. I feel like that's really foundational. Um, And it's the same with safety. If I'm filled up with safety, I'm inviting you to fill up with safety and be safe and to live in the safety that's yours, not how I want to control it, but let you
Right.
have your own safety. So anyway, I feel like it's a really important distinction.
That's a beautiful distinction. And I think the shows that we recorded before this will help people to learn how to live in, we talked about neutrality. They'll learn how to give themselves permission, right? How to shift out of stress, out of the sympathetic nervous system, which is fear inducing and cortisol producing, and move into the parasympathetic state, which is the rest, digest, and rejuvenate. That is the oxytocin state of being, which oxytocin depresses, right? It doesn't, it counteracts the effects of stress. And so when we are living in these states, we are weathering the storms of our relationships. We are feeding ourselves and giving ourselves the energy and all that we need first, love, safety, permission, certainty, and value. And then from us being filled to overflowing, we can give that to others.
Yeah.
In our last few moments, is there something else you'd like to talk about? Because this conversation is just so beautiful. I really appreciate it.
I do too. I feel like it's important to say what I said in the beginning, that this is a time where our relationships are under strain. They always are, from so many things that we've talked about, just normal everyday things, but they're under a lot of strain because of social distancing and because of some of the social tearing that we're experiencing and the ideological challenges. And we're just under a lot of strain in our relationships. And it's, meanwhile, at the same time, I believe because of so much that's going on, we need each other more than ever. And so I just encourage us all to just put our attention on being able to stay in relationships in times of challenging weather. And I hope that people keep tuning in, because we're going to be talking more and more about this for a while.
Yes, staying in relationship and being able to stay in relationship is so important. And some of the keys that we provided in prior shows about staying in neutrality apply for you to stay in relationship. So one of the first things you can do is just breathe. If something's happening, right? If there's some external thing about a relationship that's starting to raise your blood pressure, right? Start taking a breath. Remember, there is a gap between stimulus and response. There is a space of time. And that space of time, you can capture it, you can hold it, and you can breathe. Another thing we've mentioned is getting out in nature, right? Putting your feet on the earth, feeling the ability to ground and provide the sense of safety for the body, and putting your oxygen mask on first before you're helping other people with their oxygen mask, which means make sure you're drinking your water, moving your body, which is so important to circulate blood and the other fluids. So we've talked about the things that are so important for you to manage your relationships and to weather your relationships. Yes. Thank you so much for listening. If this message spoke to you, please let us know. Tell us what's on your heart. Leave us a comment, give us a call, whatever is best for you. For more information about how you can live by heart, because weathering relationships is much easier when you're living by heart, please go to our website, livebyhearttoday.com. like and follow this page and turn on the notifications. And we air every Thursday at this time, 4:44, and we will continue the conversation about relationship from our heart to yours. We're creating a better tomorrow because we live by heart today.
And that concludes this portion of
Live by Heart today!
Thank you for watching. View more episodes on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's give a shout out to our sponsors. Thank you, We Are Historically, for making this show possible.